In the vast tapestry of galactic civilization, where 1,000 species had learned to coexist through careful diplomacy and measured responses, there existed an unwritten rule that every ambassador, every trader, every spacefarer knew by heart: when a human gives you a warning, you listen. When they give you a second warning, you run. The problem was, most species never lived long enough to share that wisdom. This is the story of how the galaxy learned that human patience, while legendary, was not infinite. And how the phrase, "I won't ask again," became the most feared words in any language across the known universe. Welcome to a tale where humanity's greatest strength wasn't their technology, their numbers, or their military might. It was their remarkable ability to give fair warning before they reminded everyone exactly why they had climbed to the top of the food chain on a death world called Earth. The trading station Nexus 7 hummed with the familiar sounds of interspecies commerce. Vapor clouds from the Methanian breathing apparatus mixed with the musical chittering of the insectoid traders, while the massive Gorlak delegates stomped through corridors designed to accommodate beings ranging from the tiny Sprillings to the towering titans of Kepler 9. Captain Marcus Chen of the human merchant vessel Defiant Dawn walked through the station's main trading hall with the easy confidence of someone who had been conducting business here for the better part of a decade. His worn leather jacket and casual stride masked the fact that he carried enough firepower to level a small building, but then, again, most humans did these days. It wasn't paranoia when you'd seen as much of the galaxy as Marcus had. The trouble started, as it often did, with the Korthak Syndicate. The Korthak were relative newcomers to galactic civilization, having achieved faster-than-light travel only 50 standard years ago. They were a reptilian species with thick, armored scales and a culture built around dominance hierarchies. What they lacked in technological sophistication, they made up for with aggressive expansion and a tendency to view diplomacy as a weakness. Marcus was examining a shipment of rare earth minerals from the Altair system when he felt the familiar pressure of someone standing too close behind him. He didn't turn around immediately. Instead, he finished his conversation with the Altarian trader, thanked him in passable Altarian, and, only then, acknowledged the presence behind him. "Something I can help you with?" Marcus asked, turning to face 3 Korthak warriors. Each stood nearly 8 feet tall, their scaled hides bearing the ceremonial scarification that marked them as members of the Syndicate's military caste. The leader, distinguished by the deep purple coloring of his scales and the elaborate crest rising from his skull, stepped forward. "Human. You occupy territory that belongs to the Korthak Syndicate." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "I'm standing in a neutral trading bay that I've rented for the next 6 hours. Pretty sure I've got the documentation to prove it." "Documentation issued by weaklings and prey species," the Korthak sneered, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. "The Syndicate recognizes no authority but strength. You will vacate this space. Now." The trading hall had grown noticeably quieter. Other species were backing away, creating a wide circle around the confrontation. Marcus could see the station security team hovering at the edges of the crowd, but they made no move to intervene. Standard protocol for most species was to avoid conflict with humans when possible, but the Korthak were either too new to galactic politics or too arrogant to understand the implications. Marcus set down the mineral sample he'd been examining and turned to face the Korthak leader fully. "I paid good credits for this space, and I intend to use every minute of it. I suggest you find somewhere else to conduct your business." The Korthak's crest flared, a sign of aggression in their species. "You dare refuse a directive from the Syndicate? We have claimed this sector. All human trade routes through Korthak space now require tribute." "Tribute?" Marcus's voice remained level, but something had changed in his posture. The casual slouch was gone, replaced by the alert stance of a predator assessing a threat. "That's an interesting word. Very old-fashioned." "The old ways are the strong ways," the second Korthak interjected. "Humans have grown soft in your comfort. You have forgotten what true power looks like." Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering this perspective. "You know, you might have a point there. Humans have been pretty comfortable lately. We've been trading, building, exploring. Generally minding our own business." He paused, and, when he spoke again, his voice carried a note that made several nearby species take another step back. "But, here's the thing about comfort. It only exists because we choose to let it exist. The Korthak leader's head tilted, confused by the human's response. In his experience, threatened species either submitted or postured aggressively. This human was doing neither, and that uncertainty made him angry. Enough words, the leader snarled. You will pay the tribute or face the consequences. Marcus reached into his jacket, and all three Korthak tensed, hands moving toward their weapons. But Marcus only pulled out a small data pad, which he consulted with the air of someone checking a shopping list. According to Galactic trade law, specifically the Harmony Accords of 2387, no single species can claim exclusive trading rights in neutral space without unanimous consent from the Galactic Trade Commission. He looked up from the pad with a slight smile. That's the first warning. The Korthak leader's crest flared wider. I care nothing for your papers and laws. The strong take what they will. The strong, huh? Marcus pocketed the datapad and crossed his arms. Tell me, have any of you ever been to Earth? The question caught the Korthak off guard. Why would we visit that backwater planet? Because if you had, you'd understand something about humans that most species learn eventually. Marcus's smile grew wider, but it didn't reach his eyes. See, Earth is what we call a death world. Everything on it, from the smallest bacteria to the largest predator, is designed to kill everything else. The weather tries to kill you. The plants try to kill you. Hell, even the dirt can kill you if you're not careful. The watching crowd had grown silent, hanging on every word. Even the Korthak seemed uncertain now, though their pride prevented them from backing down. We didn't climb to the top of the food chain on that nightmare planet by being the biggest or the strongest, Marcus continued. We did it by being smart enough to give our enemies a chance to walk away before we reminded them why they should fear us. He stepped closer to the Korthak leader, and, despite the alien's significant size advantage, it was the reptilian warrior who took a half-step back. So here's your second warning, Marcus said, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute certainty. Walk away. Find another trading bay. Conduct your business like civilized beings. Because if you don't, I'm going to have to explain to my insurance company why 3 Korthak warriors suffered sudden and catastrophic existence failure while I was trying to buy minerals. The Korthak leader's scales had shifted to a darker shade, a physiological response to stress that he couldn't control. Around the trading hall, other species were nodding knowingly. The Altarians had begun placing bets on how long the Korthak would last. The insectoids were already backing further away, their compound eyes reflecting a primitive understanding of predator dynamics that transcended species barriers. You threaten us, the leader managed, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Marcus shook his head sadly. No. That's the thing you don't understand. Threats are what you do when you're not sure you can follow through. What I just gave you was a promise. He turned his back on the Korthak and walked over to the mineral sample he'd been examining, picking it up as if 3 armed warriors weren't standing 5 feet away contemplating violence. This is nice work, he said to the Altarian trader, holding the sample up to the light. What kind of extraction process do you use? The Altarian, a species known for their acute survival instincts, glanced nervously between Marcus and the Korthak. Crystalline matrix separation, honored customer. Very efficient, very clean. I'll take the whole shipment, Marcus said, pulling out his credit chip. Can you have it loaded onto my ship within the hour? The tension in the trading hall was thick enough to cut. Everyone knew what was happening, what choice the Korthak were being forced to make. They could accept the humans' dismissal and retreat, losing face but living to fight another day. Or they could press the issue and discover why humans had a reputation that preceded them to every corner of the galaxy. The Korthak leader's hand moved to the plasma rifle holstered at his side. The sound of the weapon's safety disengaging was unnaturally loud in the silent trading hall. Marcus didn't even turn around. Third time's the charm, he said conversationally to the Altarian trader. But, I suppose some lessons have to be learned the hard way. What happened next lasted exactly 14 seconds. Security footage would later be analyzed by military strategists from a dozen species, not because they wanted to understand human combat techniques, but because they needed to believe what they saw was possible. The Korthak leader drew his weapon and aimed it at Marcus's back. Marcus spun around, drawing and firing his sidearm in a single fluid motion. The plasma bolt from the Korthak's rifle passed through the space where the human's head had been a fraction of a second earlier. The second and third Korthak moved to flank Marcus, but they discovered that humans had been dealing with multiple attackers for millennia. Marcus's first shot took the leader in the center of his chest, a high-energy pulse disrupting his nervous system and dropping him instantly. His second shot caught the flanking warrior in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third warrior managed to get a shot off, but Marcus was no longer where the alien's brain expected him to be. The human moved like liquid violence, every motion efficient and deadly. His third shot ended the engagement. 14 seconds. 3 professional warriors armed with military-grade weapons. Game over. Marcus holstered his weapon and turned back to the Eltarian trader, who was staring at him with wide eyes. Sorry about the noise. Now, about that delivery schedule? The trading hall erupted in chaos as various species began talking, arguing, and transmitting messages at once. But, beneath the noise, there was something else. Something that would spread through the station, then through the shipping lanes, then across the galaxy itself. Respect. Fear. Understanding. The humans had given their warnings. The Korthak hadn't listened. And now everyone had been reminded of a fundamental truth that had shaped galactic politics for the past century: humans didn't start fights. But they finished them. News of the incident at Nexus 7 traveled faster than light through the galaxy's communication networks. Within hours, every major species had received detailed reports of what the galactic news services were calling the 14-second war. The footage was analyzed, dissected, and archived in military databases across known space. But it was the reactions of the other species that truly told the story. Ambassador Veltar of the Centaurian Diplomatic Corps was conducting a routine trade negotiation with a human representative when his aide rushed into the conference room with the news. The ambassador's tentacles went rigid with shock as he watched the security footage on a portable viewer. This human, he said to his counterpart across the negotiation table, he moved like he knew exactly where each enemy would be before they moved. The human negotiator, a middle-aged woman named Sarah Kim, glanced at the footage with professional interest. Standard combat assessment protocols. Mark your targets, evaluate threat levels, neutralize in order of priority. Basic stuff, really. Basic? Ambassador Veltar's voice rose an octave. He processed the combat geometry of 3 opponents simultaneously while executing defensive maneuvers. Our best military strategists require computer assistance to manage that level of tactical complexity. Sarah shrugged. Earth was a competitive environment. Those who couldn't multitask didn't survive to reproduce. She looked back at the trade documents they'd been reviewing. Now, about those mining rights in the Vega system. Similar conversations were taking place on 1,000 worlds. The Korthak Syndicate, once viewed as an aggressive but manageable threat, suddenly found their expansion plans meeting unexpected resistance. Other species who had been quietly submitting to Syndicate demands began asking pointed questions about tribute and territorial claims. On the Syndicate's home world of Korth Prime, war leader Thexan slammed his clawed fist into the conference table hard enough to crack the reinforced polymer surface. 3 of our finest warriors, dead. And, for what? A human trader protecting his right to buy rocks. The human was clearly some kind of specialist, offered Sub-Commander Gracoel. A military operative disguised as a civilian. It's the only explanation. General Vorthak, the oldest and most experienced of the Syndicate's military leadership, shook his massive head. I've been fighting for 40 cycles. I've seen specialists from every major species. That wasn't specialist training. That was instinct. Predator instinct. The room fell silent. General Vorthak commanded respect even among a species that worshipped strength, and his assessment carried weight. We've been thinking about this wrong, the general continued. We've been treating humans like any other species that happens to be good at warfare. But what if warfare isn't something they're good at? What if it's what they are? The silence stretched uncomfortably. Finally, Thexan spoke. You're suggesting we avoid conflict with humans entirely? I'm suggesting we learn from this before we lose more warriors to our ignorance. General Vorthak activated a holographic display showing the known human territories. Look at their expansion pattern. Not conquest. Not subjugation. Trade routes, research stations, diplomatic outposts. They spread like a peaceful species. He manipulated the display to show human military engagements over the past century. But, when threatened, they respond like this. The hologram showed the brief, decisive conflicts that had defined humanity's rise to prominence in galactic affairs. Every single engagement follows the same pattern. Warning, second warning, overwhelming response. No exceptions. Subcommander Gracoel studied the data with growing unease. You're saying they're deliberately restraining themselves? I'm saying a species that conquered a death world and, then, built a civilization based on restraint and diplomacy is not a species we want to anger. The general's crest flattened against his skull, a gesture of submission that shocked the younger officers. The human at Nexus 7 wasn't showing off. He was demonstrating mercy. Meanwhile, on the trade station itself, Captain Marcus Chen was dealing with the aftermath of his 15 minutes of fame. His ship's communication array hadn't stopped chirping with incoming messages since the incident. Job offers, interview requests, marriage proposals from species whose mating rituals he couldn't begin to understand. But it was the message from Earth Diplomatic Command that caught his attention. Captain Chen, the recorded message began, "This is Admiral Reyes, Earth Defense Command. Your actions at Nexus 7 have been reviewed and found to be within acceptable parameters for civilian self-defense. However, the galactic media attention has created what our diplomatic corps describes as a teachable moment." The Admiral's face was serious but not unfriendly. "Effective immediately, you're being recalled to Earth for consultation. We need to understand exactly what happened and how we can use this incident to reinforce the message we've been trying to send for the past century. Humanity prefers peace, but we're very good at war." Marcus sighed and set down his coffee cup. He'd been planning to spend another month in the outer systems, picking up rare materials and exotic technologies. But, when Earth called, you answered. Especially when they used phrases like teachable moment. The recall to Earth was just the beginning. Within weeks, the incident at Nexus 7 had been incorporated into the standard diplomatic briefing given to all newly contacted species. The footage was shown alongside historical documentation of human conflict resolution, painting a picture of a species that had somehow managed to balance overwhelming military capability with an almost pathological commitment to giving enemies a way out. The Altarian trader who had witnessed the confrontation became something of a celebrity in his own right. His first-hand account of the incident was downloaded millions of times across the Galactic network. The human never raised his voice, he told an interviewer from Galactic News Network. Even when he was explaining why the Korthak should leave, he sounded like he was discussing the weather. But there was something in his eyes, something that made my survival instincts scream danger. I think that's what the other species don't understand about humans. They can be absolutely lethal while remaining completely calm. The interviewer, a crystalline being from the silicon-based worlds of the Outer Rim, resonated with curiosity. "Do you believe the human wanted to avoid violence?" "Oh, absolutely," the Altarian replied without hesitation. Everything about his body language said he was hoping the Korthak would take his warnings seriously. But he was also prepared for them not to. That's what made it so terrifying. He was simultaneously the person least likely to start a fight and the person you least wanted to fight with. This interview was broadcast across the galaxy, and it sparked something unprecedented in galactic politics, a formal academic study of human psychology and its implications for interspecies relations. Dr. Zenthara, a renowned xenopsychologist from the Mentis Collective, led the research team. Her findings, published in the Journal of Galactic Behavioral Sciences, would become required reading in diplomatic academies across known space. Humans appear to have evolved a unique approach to conflict resolution, her paper concluded. Unlike species that rely on dominance displays, submission rituals, or avoidance behaviors, humans have developed what we term graduated deterrence. They provide clear warnings that escalate in seriousness, giving opponents multiple opportunities to reconsider their actions. The paper went on to explain the psychological mechanisms behind this behavior. The human capacity for violence is not diminished by their diplomatic inclinations. Rather, their understanding of violence's consequences has led them to develop elaborate social mechanisms for avoiding it. This makes them arguably the most dangerous species in the galaxy, precisely because they work so hard not to be dangerous. The implications were staggering. Military academies began teaching courses on human warning recognition. Diplomatic protocols were updated to include specific guidelines for interpreting human communication patterns. Trade routes were restructured to ensure human territories remained accessible and unthreatened. But, perhaps the most significant change was in how other species viewed their own aggressive tendencies. The Korthak Syndicate, faced with the reality that their expansion model was fundamentally flawed, began experimenting with human-style diplomacy. To their surprise, they discovered that negotiation often achieved better results than intimidation, and with far fewer casualties. The Galactic hegemony, previously known for their territorial disputes with neighboring systems, established their first permanent diplomatic mission. The Insectoid Collective began offering conflict resolution services to species struggling with territorial disputes. It was as if the entire galaxy had suddenly realized that the apex predators among them had been trying to teach them a better way all along. Captain Chen, meanwhile, found himself assigned to a new role, Diplomatic Enforcement Liaison. His job was to travel with Earth's diplomatic corps, serving as a living reminder of what happened when negotiations failed. It wasn't a job he had asked for, but he understood its importance. People need to see that we're serious about peace, Admiral Reyes had explained during his briefing. But they also need to understand that our commitment to peace doesn't make us weak. Your presence sends both messages simultaneously. Marcus had accepted the assignment with the same pragmatic attitude that had served him well as a trader. If his reputation could help prevent conflicts before they started, it was worth the career change. His first assignment was to accompany Ambassador Patricia Wells to a contested system where two minor species were arguing over mining rights. The dispute had been dragging on for months, with both sides gradually escalating their rhetoric and military postures. When the human delegation arrived, both species representatives were surprised to see the infamous Nexus 7 human as part of the diplomatic team. "Gentlemen," Ambassador Wells began the negotiations, "I'd like you to meet Captain Chen. He's here to ensure that our discussions remain productive and focused on finding mutually beneficial solutions." The representatives exchanged nervous glances. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Earth took these negotiations seriously enough to send someone with a very specific reputation. The mining dispute was resolved in record time. 5 years after the incident at Nexus 7, the galaxy had settled into what historians would later call the era of informed caution. The phrase human warning had entered the common lexicon of dozens of languages, always carrying the same weight: pay attention, because what comes next will be final. The Galactic Council chambers on Centauri Prime buzzed with nervous energy as representatives from across known space gathered for the most significant diplomatic session in recorded history. The agenda was simple in its complexity: formal recognition of what everyone already knew to be true, but no one wanted to say out loud. Humans were the apex species, not through conquest or domination, but through the simple, terrifying fact that everyone else had learned to be very polite to them. Ambassador Patricia Wells sat in the human delegation section, reviewing her notes one final time. Beside her, Captain Marcus Chen observed the assembly with the same calm attention he had brought to that fateful day at the trading station. His role here was largely symbolic, but symbolism mattered in galactic politics. "The representative from the Korthak Syndicate would like to address the assembly," announced the session moderator, a towering crystalline whose harmonic voice carried perfect neutrality. General Vorthak, now the Syndicate's primary diplomatic representative, rose from his seat. The scars from his species restructuring were visible in his bearing, once proud and aggressive, now measured and respectful. "Honored delegates," he began, his translator rendering his words into the dozens of languages spoken in the chamber. The Korthak Syndicate formally requests inclusion in the Terran Protection Protocol. A ripple of surprise ran through the assembly. The Terran Protection Protocol had been the galaxy's worst-kept secret for 3 years, an informal understanding that any species under human protection would not face aggression from others. It had started small, with minor trading partners requesting human mediation in disputes. But, as word spread of its effectiveness, more species had quietly aligned themselves under what was euphemistically called Earth's diplomatic umbrella. The Syndicate acknowledges our previous misunderstandings regarding human diplomatic methodology, General Vorthak continued. We have spent the past 5 years studying the principles of graduated deterrence and conflict de-escalation. We formally request Earth's guidance in implementing these practices within our own territories. Ambassador Wells leaned forward slightly. This was unprecedented. The Korthak weren't just asking for protection, they were asking to be taught human methods of peacekeeping. It was a complete reversal of everything their culture had stood for. The Syndicate's request is noted, Ambassador Wells replied carefully. Earth's diplomatic corps will need to review the specifics of any such arrangement. However, we appreciate the Syndicate's commitment to peaceful conflict resolution. What she didn't say, what everyone in the chamber understood, was that the Korthak had essentially admitted what every intelligence service in the galaxy already knew: human methods worked. Not just for humans, but for anyone willing to learn them. Dr. Zenthara of the Mentis Collective rose next, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into prismatic patterns. The collective has completed our 5-year study of human diplomatic methodology. With the permission of the Assembly, I would like to present our findings. A massive holographic display materialized in the center of the chamber, showing statistical analyses, behavioral models, and comparative data that represented the most comprehensive study of interspecies relations ever undertaken. Our research confirms what many have suspected, Dr. Zenthara began. Human diplomatic protocols, when adopted by other species, result in a 94% reduction in armed conflicts, a 67% increase in successful trade negotiations, and a measurable improvement in overall galactic stability. The numbers spoke for themselves, but she continued with the implications. The key factor appears to be what we have termed credible restraint. Unlike traditional diplomacy, which relies on mutual weakness or balanced threats, human methodology operates on the principle that true strength is demonstrated through the choice not to use it. This creates a psychological environment where all parties feel simultaneously safe and motivated to find peaceful solutions. She manipulated the display to show conflict resolution patterns across the galaxy. Species operating under human guidance or protection show marked improvements in their own diplomatic capabilities. They learn to give warnings, to escalate incrementally, and to maintain peaceful options even during tense negotiations. Captain Chen watched the presentation with interest. He'd never thought of his actions at Nexus 7 as part of a diplomatic methodology. To him, it had simply been the right thing to do, give everyone a chance to walk away before someone got hurt. But, as the data played out across the holographic display, he began to understand the larger implications. Humanity hadn't just stumbled into galactic prominence, they demonstrated a fundamentally different approach to power that other species were now desperately trying to learn. The collective's findings raise an important question, continued Dr. Zenthara. Should these methodologies be formally codified into galactic law? Should the principles of graduated deterrence become the standard for all interspecies conflicts? The chamber erupted in discussion. Representatives conferred with their delegations in dozens of languages, while translators worked overtime to keep up with the flow of ideas and concerns. Ambassador Wells stood to address the assembly. Earth appreciates the collective's thorough research. However, we must emphasize that what you're describing isn't a methodology that can simply be legislated. It's a cultural approach that emerges from specific historical and psychological circumstances. She gestured toward Captain Chen, who remained seated but nodded acknowledgement. The actions that began this discussion weren't the result of training or policy. They were the natural response of someone raised in a culture that values both strength and restraint. This was the crucial point that many species still struggle to understand. You couldn't simply teach someone to be effectively dangerous while choosing not to be dangerous. It required a fundamental shift in how a species viewed power, conflict, and their place in the universe. The representative from the Silicon Collective, a geometric being whose thoughts processed in mathematical harmonics, requested recognition. The Silicon Worlds propose a compromise. Rather than attempting to codify human methods, we suggest the establishment of formal human diplomatic advisory positions throughout the galaxy. Let Earth's representatives serve as guides and mediators, helping other species develop their own versions of these principles. It was an elegant solution that acknowledged both the effectiveness of human methods and the impossibility of simply copying them wholesale. Admiral Sarah Chen, Marcus's sister and Earth's highest-ranking military diplomat, rose from the human delegation. Earth would be willing to consider such an arrangement, with appropriate safeguards and limitations. We have no interest in imposing our values on other species, but we're committed to helping maintain galactic peace through whatever means are most effective. The discussions that followed would continue for months, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The galaxy had tried aggression, territorial expansion, and traditional power politics. They'd all led to conflicts that drained resources and threatened the stability that made interstellar civilization possible. Human methods worked because they addressed the fundamental problem underlying most conflicts, the inability to back down without losing face. By providing clear escalation patterns and multiple opportunities for withdrawal, human diplomacy allowed all parties to find solutions that preserved their dignity while avoiding violence. 6 months later, the first class of galactic diplomatic advisors graduated from the new academy established on Earth. Representatives from 43 species learned not just the techniques of graduated deterrence, but the underlying philosophy that made them work. Captain Marcus Chen, now promoted to Diplomatic Enforcement Director, delivered the graduation address. Standing before delegates who represented the most diverse gathering in galactic history, he reflected on how far everyone had come since that day at Nexus 7. When I gave those Korthak warriors their warnings, he began, I wasn't trying to start a diplomatic revolution. I was just trying to avoid a fight that didn't need to happen. But sometimes the simplest actions have the biggest consequences. He looked out at the assembled graduates, seeing species that had been enemies learning to work together, former aggressors becoming mediators, and peaceful traders becoming confident negotiators. The most important thing you've learned here isn't a technique or a protocol. It's that true strength comes from the choice to be strong only when necessary. Every species in this galaxy has the capacity for violence. What makes us civilized is our commitment to finding better solutions. The ceremony concluded with the traditional human custom of a handshake, adapted for species with claws, tentacles, crystalline appendages, and energy fields. It was messy, complicated, and required constant adaptation, just like diplomacy itself. As the graduates dispersed to their assignments across the galaxy, each carried with them a simple but powerful message: strength without restraint is destruction, but restraint without strength is surrender. The key to galactic peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the wisdom to know when to fight and when to find a better way. The incident at Nexus 7 had lasted 14 seconds. Its consequences would shape galactic civilization for centuries to come. In trade stations across known space, a new practice had emerged. When negotiations grew heated, when threats were made, when violence seemed imminent, someone would inevitably invoke the phrase that had become synonymous with final warnings: remember Nexus 7. And, in that moment of remembrance, cooler heads would prevail, alternative solutions would be explored, and the galaxy would remain just a little more peaceful than it had been before. The humans had given everyone the same choice they'd given the Korthak: learn to walk away, or discover why walking away was the smarter option. Most species, having seen the alternative, chose wisdom. Those who didn't learned quickly that humans were very good teachers, even when the lesson only lasted 14 seconds.